Science and Engineering representative for the school year, but not for very long. Yes, happy Sango elections. Bumoto po kayo next week. Okay, so with this guys, we are in this year's Talakayang Alay sa Bayan. This is an annual event in the Ateneo de Manila University. So, sino po mga fourth year dito? Fourth year. Old. Ancient. Alam mo mga ancient history. The last time that the last lab happened when we were in our first years. Wow, how time flies. Wow, we're old. So, this is an annual event wherein we discuss the different issues of society as of the moment, with our theme of building back inclusive futures. This is why our theme for today is breaking the infodemic. Because according to the World Health Organization, we are facing an infodemic. An influx of issues and an influx of information na you don't know where to go. To the left or to the right. Umikot pang sabay-sabay. Charot. But this means that there is now more than ever an importance for us to be advocates for science communication. Meron po ba dito hindi taga-SOSE? Raise your hands. Non-SOSE? Non-SOSE? Yes, mahalaga din po kayo. The talk for today may be directed to science majors, but it's not just for science majors because science is not just for SOSE. Science is for everyone. And I hope po at the end of the day that you will be able to learn a few tidbits from our speakers. Be it in the field of sciences, be it in the field of social sciences, business, humanities. Naway may mapulot po kayo. Hindi na po tayo pambobola al Ateneo, okay? Especially with today, we're in talamak na talamak po ang disinformation. Once again, disinformation with elections. So with this, we hope that you guys become advocates for the truth and advocates for the good. Maraming salamat po sa ating lahat. And I hope that you have a great afternoon. Maraming salamat.
Thank you so much, Norse, for that wonderful speech. Talaga namang science is for everyone. And I hope we really learn a lot of things here in our talk. And I think that really made us have high expectations now for everything that is in store for today. But now let's keep listening as we will have our very first talk.
Oo nga, no? But before this, for all our talks and our panel discussion, we will be coursing all questions through this Slido. So ayan, the one being flashed on screen right now. So we'll be giving you guys a minute. You guys can take a picture of it with your phone, scan the QR code. So make sure lang, when you type in your question, to indicate whom you'll be asking the question to. So in case we lack time to go through all these questions, don't worry because we'll be sending them to our speakers via email for you guys to answer, no? So maybe another 10 seconds, you guys can take a picture of the Slido link. Or ano ba yan? Yung Slido number 1485333. Okay. I hope you guys got it. Kita nyo ba? Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Yana. So, ito na nga. Our first keynote presentation is on science and communication and its impact on policy. Our speaker is Ingrid Espinosa, a science communicator from Ateneo Batch 2015. She recently finished studying Masters in Science Communication at Imperial College London under Chevening Scholarship. Before this, she worked for 6 years in public health research, studying public health programs, and helping inform policy. She has also done freelance writing and volunteered in making policy briefs to help COVID-19 response. She's open to freelancing and volunteers as a co-director of comms and events at Grand Map Philippines. Again, let us welcome Ms. Ingrid Espinosa.
Hello. Hi. Okay, nakanervous naman to. Thanks everyone for coming and thanks for inviting me. Para magamit naman yung aking masters. Char. Thanks for coming on this warm Tuesday. We'll be talking a bit about science communication, which pag tinatanong ako ng magulang ko or ng family members ko, ano ba yung science communication? Sinasabi ko na lang, basta yung media na non-fiction, yung totoo. Or at least what I would like to think is totoo. And you know what that means, but we'll come to that later. So I wanted to talk to you guys today about paano next slide. about first, what is SciComm? So I think it's interesting na maraming, sino yung mga sauce dito today? And then yung mga non-sauce. Okay, it's a good mix, yeah. Kasi this is actually for everyone naman. So what is SciComm? So it's getting quite more popular now, but I think there's still some confusion into what it actually is. Then we'll talk a bit about some ideas that might help us look at SciComm and approach it. So specifically risk, precaution, and newspapers. What are those, right? But we'll see how that's relevant. And what that means for us at the human scale. And we'll talk about, I don't know, maybe mosquitoes or rats. I haven't decided yet. So let's see how we're feeling later. So first, sorry, medyo ano ako eh. What comes to mind when you guys hear science communication? What do you think about it? Isigaw nyo lang. Para, unless gusto nyo may pumili ako, sigaw nyo lang. What is science communication for you? Where have you heard about it? Ano yan? Journals, okay. Sige, journals lang. Okay, sir. Sorry? Data reporting, okay. Alright, so journals, data reporting. It's interesting na ito yung mga nasabi nyo because I would think that it's more mainstream. So definitely those are great forms of science communication. But also we have a lot of things going on in social media. We have documentaries, podcasts, science journalism in general, and all the things like that. But I think one thing that would be good to clear up is what makes science communication in particular, next slide please, different from other types of communication? Why am I speaking to lots of saucy people and not from the humanities or from sauce? I think what makes science communication different is that because it's nonfiction, there's a certain standard of rigor and accuracy. So not only are we talking about ideas and narrative that we're communicating to each other, but we're also talking about the institution of science in general, which, when I was growing up, I really saw this as sort of source of stability and authority. Like, okay, cool, this is what we know about the world, this is something I'll believe in, it's gonna be true forever, hanggang pagtanda ko. And, science is really one of our biggest and most trusted institutions. It not only tells, not only shapes what, perhaps, will I want to be a scientist in the future, but also like questions like, do I want to take the vaccine? Do I trust this person? Do I think this is true or not? And as we've all seen. But in my years of working and research, my relationship with science has changed quite a bit. So we know there's a lot of things that we know now that we didn't know before. So science is continuously evolving. And although masakit man sa akin nung una, it's perhaps not as stable as we might have thought. And although it is this great human institution, it's still very much a human institution. So it evolves, it changes, we learn, and at the same time, it's so deeply intertwined with our society. Like we know that it's not always representative. There are things like epistemic injustice, which means that maybe some parts of the science that we have taken as fact before were shaped by certain authorities or people, and then we find out later on that this might be discriminatory because they don't include everyone. So those are some things to consider when we're communicating about science. So how do we approach it then? If it's something that's so like quirky and it has its own caveats na naman kailangan intindihin, how do we approach it? So, wow, sorry ha, ba-lecture tayo ngayon. Next slide please. Pero parang naman may bago kayong matutunan today from me. It might help. There's a certain framework that I like using by Sterling where we can take a look at risk based on different states of certainty or uncertainty. So I think I used to think of science as things which are true, which are for sure true. But we know now that there are different states of uncertainty, things we don't know to be true, and things we don't know. So there are different ways of looking at it. So we have things like risk, and knowing what we know and don't know can help us decide how to approach certain issues. So for instance, there are things like risk, which we know well about in terms of the likelihood of it to happen and the nature of what's going to happen. So a good example of this is like flood or transportation or known epidemics. We generally can model these things, and though there's never any complete certainty, we have a general good idea of what's going to happen. So in the realm of risk, when we know the probability of things happening and the nature of what's going to happen, or of the damage rather, or the possible harm, we usually take the approach of risk assessment, risk management. We're able to operationalize these things, right? So pag traffic, pag may floods, there are systems in place in how to mitigate these things. But what about all the other cases? For instance, ambiguity, when we have good knowledge of the probability but not really of the outcome. So a good example of this, I think, is things like AI, right? So we all know that this AI is just gonna keep getting better and better. For now, makikita mo pa, diba, yung mga nag-evolve, yung mga mid-journey, before you can tell through the hands, diba, kung gawa sa AI. Pero recently, I learned na it can do hands na well. Certainly, there are still other ways to tell, but we're just gonna assume that things are gonna get better. But we don't know how society is gonna react to this. We don't know how people will use this. So that's one state of uncertainty. Another one is when we have a good knowledge of the outcome, but not of the probability. So for instance, new pathogens. So it's quite likely that, new pathogens will evolve, but we're not sure when it's gonna happen, how it's gonna happen. And finally, there are matters of total ignorance, where we don't know how likely it's gonna happen, how likely it is, and what is gonna happen if ever. So I don't know, aliens, right? Who knows when they're gonna come, if they're gonna come, and how we're gonna react to that. So for all these forms of states of uncertainty, usually the approach we take is precaution. So we take the precautionary principle. And this states that, next slide please, where there are threats of serious or irreversible damage, lack of full scientific certainty shall not be used as a reason for postponing cost-effective measures. So this was way back in 1992, and originally the context of this was environmental damage. But it's been used a lot in fields like tech, governance, and of course, health. So basically, in other words, if there's a chance of harm, even if it's not conclusively proven, a chance of harm, even if it's not conclusively proven, we're not gonna wait for the proof. We're gonna act in a way that minimizes the danger, right? In other words, better safe than sorry. And we've seen this a lot, diba? We used to quarantine for 5 days even if there's no sure contact. We would even contact trace, we would wear masks, even if we're not sure na merong tao who could transmit a virus in our vicinity. But if we take this approach, it means that we're erring on the side of precaution. And this has been really useful. But at the same time, if this is how we approach policy, how can we integrate this into the way we communicate? So, to be able to frame this question, I think I'd like to introduce more ideas, more concepts. Next slide, please. Of how we communicate. And so this is what I meant by, let's talk about newspapers, right? So let's look at it from two views of communication. So we have the transmission view and the ritual view. So according to the transmission view, this follows a kind of linear model. So it sees communication in terms of like submitting information, sending information, receiving it. So when you open a newspaper, the journalist wrote something down, it got sent to you through this piece of paper, and then you read it, and now you know more. It's quite simple and quite useful, honestly. It's still definitely useful. But there's another way of looking at communication that might be a bit helpful in other circumstances. So for the ritual view of communication, I like the description of kind of saying it's aimed at the maintenance of society over time. O, diba? Masok na tayo sa endlit. It's not about sending and receiving, but more about portraying shared beliefs. So if we look at newspapers in this way, communicating through a newspaper is not just about, okay, I've learned new information, I know better now, I'm more informed, but rather it sees it more as a ritual, a drama. So, if you wanted the newspaper, you would go to the store, kakausapin mo muna yung nagbebenta, ipili ka, ano bang babasahin mong newspaper? Manila Bulletin ka ba? Philippine Star? Or ano ba yung tabloid ngayon? Hindi ko na alam. You read it alone, you read it with other people, do you talk about it? So before, you would talk about yesterday's headlines the next day, but if you read For instance, from Twitter now or Rappler, pag-usapan niya na agad-agad. Yeah, if you have a 24-hour news cycle, it's quite different from back then with newspapers when you would have to wait the next day to get something new. So under this, the communication is really a lot more encompassing and it really forms our culture. So, and at the same time, not only does it form the way we receive things, but also the way that we respond, right? So as we've shifted to more digital media, newspapers have gotten shorter, some have folded, community papers have folded, and almost everyone has an online platform now. So communication not only is a way of sending and receiving, but really forming the reality that we live in today. So what does this mean for COVID and health and disinformation? I think this is relevant to see communication not just as messages and facts, but rather as culture, because at the end of the day, we are humans in a human society. Humans do science, they do things in the lab. Humans write it, publish it. Humans practice it and form a culture around it. And I think a lot of COVID has been about grappling with science as a human endeavor, that we learn, that we make mistakes. There are things we don't know. But also, when we say we don't know, it means that we've tried different methods. This is our limit. And we're saying that we don't know because we want to try something else and try something new. And this whole shift has been trying to adjust and change our culture in a way that embraces these things that we now have to face, that we haven't really had to face quite so head on before. Dami, no? It's a lot. So what can we do? This is a lot of theory. So we talked about how we see danger, how we see risk, how we approach it, and how we can communicate that risk and danger in a way that can perhaps minimize harm. So I think the best things we can do is first, understand the nature of science as, again, a great enterprise with lots of systems and lots of checks, but a human one nevertheless, that is always evolving and always requires our participation. Embrace saying, I don't know, and knowing what to do after that, or at least considering what to do after that. It also means looking critically and sharing critically. If communication is culture, consider how you want to participate. And I think that really begins with listening. So before you speak, always listen. Not just to each other, but also to yourself. Are there certain patterns in the way that you consume media and you participate that work for you or perhaps don't work anymore? Has the culture changed? Have things, it's just interesting coming back here about how, some things don't change, like yes, orgs, events, seniors are so active. Pero yung music na nagpo-play ngayon, iba na. The way I speak with you now, it can be kind of different. The jokes I would make would be different. So I was just sitting there, listening for a little bit, thinking how can I speak to you in a way that would engage you and would, grant me entry into this culture. Because, what we follow and what we read may be what already confirms us. Like for instance, with the newspaper example earlier, when you read the newspaper or when you look at the news, how often do you actually see something actually new, right? I mean, okay, nag-slash ulit ng budget, wala pa rin suporta para sa mga doktor, para sa mga scientists. You already knew that, so you heart it. But what might be new is how you react to it now, how you respond to it. Like, okay, puno ka na ba or kaya pa? We follow what confirms us, but we also create based on what we believe. We can follow maps, but we also make those maps and build the towns that those maps portray. And I think for college students like you, it can be quite abstract. Like, okay, so how do we participate? But also, always I think, when it comes to like big things like this, which can be overwhelming, always look at the human scale. So it always starts first listening to yourself and listening to others, but also know that science communication culture is not just always concentrated in certain ways. Like, it is in journals, it is in podcasts, it is in data viz, but it's also in media. It's also in the movies we see, it's in the advertisements we see. It's the way we use financial technology. Gcash, is it easy? Is it hard? Does it get everywhere? When I see this, do I understand how to make sense of it? It's in the way we make our pub mats, we make our conversations, we make our presentations. It's the way we make documentaries. the way our government works, it's the way banking works, it's the way we buy and sell our clothes. It's in all forms of industry, and science communication is just everywhere if you stop and pay attention to the culture that we've built and made around it. So I think first from understanding risk and harm, we can then later understand the culture and then create that culture that we want to live in. Next slide. Next slide na pala. So yeah, like back a few years ago, I was also sitting in the same place as you. I didn't know I was gonna go into science communication. I was like, sige, pre-med ako yung course ko, pero ayoko pala mag-doctor. Hindi ko naman inisip na this is where I want to be. I just worked in research, and along the way, I realized that I would pay a lot of attention to my relationship with science, other people's relationship with science, and the way that we would interact with it through communication. So I think never underestimate what you can do for whatever industry you are, because again, it's not only the creatives, the journalists, the scientists who are involved in science communication, but it's in everybody who uses science in their life, and that's everyone right now. Next slide, please. Okay. Feeling ko yung pacing ko pwede pa mag-improve. Anyway, sige. I think we have time for both of my little side kwentos. Let's talk about, vaccines. Where were you guys nung nangyari yung Dengvaxia vaccine scandal? Are you guys familiar with that? Can you raise your hand if you're familiar with Dengvaxia? Oh yeah, everyone. Cool. So, sige. Don't be shy, ha? Shout out, what words do you think of when you hear Dengvaxia? Ano? Acosta. Ay, they're shy. Sige. Sabihin ko na lang yung akin. Yung akin talaga naisip ko kaguluhan. Napakagulo. Nag-work ako sa public health doon, pero ako mismo parang nalilito. Parang wait lang, ayoko na. And I think that was a very interesting event. So I wrote a paper about it last year in my studies. And I think what I found is that, we had this vaccine, right? And say what you will about pharma, it had some potential, I think. There was some consensus that it had potential. But, as it moved from something that we didn't know much about to something that we knew more about, the conversation about it became more about personalities. It became more about fear, of suspicion, of danger, of death. And because of that, what happened, right? A few years later, we have a measles outbreak. A few years later, we have vaccine hesitancy. Because the conversation on vaccines at that particular point of time had turned to one that was about personalities and fear, the culture and our behavior followed that communication. And that conversation became our reality, which we're still dealing with now. Next slide, please. And on a more personal note, my own experience as well, communicating science. So, nung COVID, we made a bunch of infographics about the rapid antigen tests. So, remember, it was being rolled out, diba? Like as a sort of passport immunity for people to go back to school or to business. But as it happens, one of the scientists I was working with made an analysis and found that the quality of these tests really varied. Like, next slide, please. Some of them were like 20, let's say accuracy, pero the epi people will not talk about sensitivity and specificity. But let's just say na the range of accuracy would be, some of them would be 95% accurate, great, but some of them were only 20% or 50% accurate. Pag 50%, it means if you flip the coin, you would get the same chance of getting an accurate result than taking a test. And how much would these tests cost, right? So we thought, this is really strange. I think we should make something to inform people about this so they can make informed decisions. Like, people don't know it, so maybe we can tell them this information and they will behave better. Makes sense, right? From the transmission model. As it happened, this became one of our most shared and controversial posts. And we received a lot of feedback, lots of engagement, but also lots of nice questions and some nice feedback, but also quite a few long, angry messages saying, we didn't know what we were doing, you didn't consider this is an error here, over there. And honestly, that really scarred me. Like, I had been working for a few years already, but after that, sabi ko, oh my God, hirap pala itong psychom. My gosh, there's so much at stake. Ayaw na nilang maniwala sa mga scientists. Ayaw na nilang maniwala sa amin. May numbers naman, ba't ayaw lang maniwala? And I got really scared. But looking back on it now, I think I should have been more confident. I should have understood the culture that I was working with. So this was during pandemic times. Everything was all online. We were all on social media. And I should have remembered that, on social media, this isn't personal. People can say things that maybe they won't say to you face to face. Comments can come, and if they're helpful, sure, take that help, but some of them are less helpful than others. And we always have the choice to see, definitely listen, but also take what is useful to you only. And so from there, I learned a lot in terms of, okay, I would have been more confident if I had double checked, the analysis was sound, pero if I took the time to really sit with it and know that I myself was convinced, and also see that I was not only talking to people who were deciding on taking this test, but also people who were buying these tests just so that their business could go back to normal. This is not necessarily coming out of greed, but they just want things to go back to normal, right? So I was not just feeding information, but really working in this culture of people with different values, with different interests, and all of them are equally valid. We all thought we were right? I mean, if you're running a business, you're thinking of this. If you have a family, you're thinking of this. But I think understanding that and having a better grasp of that would allow me to be more confident and shape this message, which is, I think, it's still good, but it would just allow me to be even more mindful. So, after a few years had passed and I thought about it, I'm here, I studied it a bit, so I guess you could say that I have become a bit more confident and ready to engage. But I think I just wanted to, close this on a note that, yeah, it is a bit scary. We're all human, and we've learned, and we all learn. But I think the worst outcome would be if we didn't engage at all. So I think science communication is all about understanding that being human in all parts of our institutions, listening, and also always coming back and participating. Because I care about science, I care about knowledge, I care about how we make decisions, and I want to be part of constructing this culture around it, especially around health and about our scientists. Because we make our decisions from this. This is what we live with. This communication makes our reality. And I'm looking forward to learning more about how to do that well from the next speakers. So, next slide, please. So, I hope that was helpful in how you see science and science communication. And if you have any other questions, feel free to contact me here or through the organizers. Thank you.